Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to lesson 2 in unit 5. We're talking about piano voicing, and this lesson really is more sort of advice when it comes to writing music and voicing piano parts. So let's get into the gray box real quick, and we'll talk about some tips and tricks when it comes to piano music. Okay, when voicing chords for piano, you can of course use more than one note in the left hand. That's done. If you've seen piano music before, you've probably seen several notes played in the left hand at the same time. However, okay, and here's the however, the but. All right, closed position chords, that's block chords like snowmen, in the left hand are generally avoided as they cause a muddy sound. It's usual to have the third of the chord placed up an octave. What they're saying is when you do use multiple notes in the left hand, try not to keep them too close together, and certainly don't use the third of the chord, in this case an A, really low down deep in the voicing, in the range. Okay, when you're playing an F chord, like here's an F chord, right? Instead of having an A or the third of the chord way down here, put it up here, right? Put it at the top of the bass clef, or better yet, just use the one in the right hand in the treble clef, all right? And I'll show you why right now. So let me just move this up a little bit. I'm going to take the screen. Okay, so you can still see the two versions of this F chord. Okay, and now here with a piano keyboard, I'm going to show you what it sounds like right now. So the first thing you see here, guys, is the F, A, C, F in the left hand and the F, A in the right hand. That sounds like this when I play it on the piano. Alright, certainly a very full sounding chord, but the problem necessarily is that you have too much in the left hand. It's too muddy, there's just too much, okay? A very standard thing you want to do when you're voicing music, whether it's for piano or for a band, is you want to generally limit the lower voices and avoid the use of the third, in this case the A, too low in the range. So when you have that A way down here in the dumps, right, what ends up happening is that's just too gross. There's too much in there. Whereas if you just have F and C, that's much more clean sounding, okay? And you can certainly keep the A up there, or you could put the A even at the top of the bass clef, okay? Or just leave it all the way out altogether at the top. You can just have F, C, F, and the right hand, so the third only sits at the very top of the range. That is very, hopefully to your ears, very much more pleasing than having that A way down at the bottom here. So listen to the difference. Versus, all right? So that's how that works. Generally, a rule of thumb, avoid use of the third really down deep in the range. Okay, let's move on. So overall range for a piano accompaniment style, all right? Generally, you want to stay within the low F, below the bass clef, to about the C in the middle of the treble clef. That's generally a good range to be, okay? You can certainly use octaves and voices that are down below, way down, further down in the bass clef. That's certainly acceptable, especially if you wanted to just do octaves of the left hand. But you generally also want to avoid anything higher than this high C. The reason is because as an accompaniment instrument, certainly when your piano is acting as an accompaniment voice for a soloist or for something else, if you play anything higher than that C, anything up in that range, what's going to end up happening is those sounds will end up cutting through the overall texture, right? And it may very well get in the way of whatever soloist is playing, especially if your soloist is doing something in the mid-range. Let's say you have an alto saxophone, for example, right? And yeah, they can play high, but often a lot of their music is down in here, right in the middle of the treble clef. And so if you're playing stuff that's way up in the stratosphere, it may get in the way. All right, so generally stay within that high C to low F bottom of the range. If you generally stay within the two staves, in the two bass clef and treble clef, you're generally good to go. All right. Okay, so some ideal chord voicings that work particularly well, as it says here. You can obviously split up the sounds into whatever permutations you want. You don't have to have block snowmen all the time. Okay, they give you some examples here at the top. Okay, you can have, the third, the root, and have only the fifth down deep in the range. That's certainly possible. All right, the options they give you here. So here's an example of a major chord, a major triad, specifically. Okay, a C and a G in the left hand, or the root and the fifth of the chord. And the missing third exists up at the top of the voicing at the bottom of the treble clef. So this voicing, these four notes, sound like this. Certainly it's an acceptable voicing because we're avoiding use of the third too low in the range. And we're not going too high in general. It's not like we're doing something up past the treble clef. Anything bright and shrill like that. We're staying in the meat and the heart of the range. Okay, very, very acceptable voicing. And of course, with that, you can also add the fifth, the G up top as well. That's totally acceptable. And if you want to add the C above that as well, so C, G, and then the right hand. Whatever version you want to do generally works all the time. The difference in a minor chord, as you can see here when you compare the two, okay, from the major to the minor, is of course just the use of the third. You have the interval of a minor third, or a lowered third, of the triad. Everything else stays the same. The fifth is the same, the root is the same, it's all there. So what was a major chord, you drop that E to an E flat, and all of a sudden you have E minor. Moving on. A dominant seventh chord. A dominant seventh, as you know, is a major triad with a lowered seventh, right? Or a 5/7, if you want to think of it that way. So a dominant seventh chord on C is a C major chord with a B flat, the lowered seventh. They're still putting the root and the fifth in the left hand, and they're still putting the third in the right hand. But now, instead of doubling the root like they did back here, they're going to take that root down a whole step and use the lowered seventh, the dominant seventh. And that sounds like this. Well, sorry. First off, I'll play the root, fifth, and third so you can hear the nice, pretty major chord. Right? And now when we add that B flat, you're going to hear a lot of color come in. A lot of tension. Okay? So that's part of the purpose of the dominant seventh chord. It sounds like a 5 chord, which really wants us to move to a 1 chord. Okay, and just as a quick review, a dominant seventh chord built on C, well, C would be the dominant of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, F, right? So a C7 chord wants our ears to move to an F chord. Have a listen. Doesn't that sound very final and very resolute? Okay, so that's just as a review from before, that's the purpose of a dominant seventh. All right, moving on to the bottom. Your activity is to voice the following chords in the middle to moderately low range, just like we said above. Don't really go above the staff, the middle, the C, a high C in the middle of the staff. Moderately low range in the piano staff using the ideal chord voicings indicated above. So generally something like this some kind of permutation of these would be great. All right, I'll do the first one with you. So an E triad, right? With the left hand, you generally don't really have a choice. You have to have an E as the lowest pitch. So we're going to put an E down here. And then with the rest of it, you have options. You can pretty much copy the structure above and do a fifth and double the root and add the third above. Of course, that third will be a G sharp in this case, and that voicing will sound like this. Now, just like with all voicings, you have options. Some of you may wish to do something like, oh, I don't know, keep that G sharp there and use the octave above. So now you have this. Now that is getting a little bit high in the range, okay, but not the end of the world. Certainly you can do something like that. Okay, so maybe you want to do, instead of something like that, sorry, let me get my eraser again. Instead of playing that really high E, playing the low E, right? Doubling the octave below. Now that would of course mean that you can't necessarily you can't play this B with your left hand, because reaching from a low E to the octave and the B above, that's just not doable with one hand. So maybe this B is played by the right hand. And I can notate that really clearly by removing it from the bass clef and putting that exact same pitch in the treble clef. And now I have two E's in the bass in the left hand, and the right hand takes care of the third and fifth. The fifth on the low end and the third up top. And that's another perfectly acceptable way to voice the chord. All right, one more little note before we finish off here. When you have a seventh chord, right, like this A minor 7, of course you have to have the A on the lowest as the lowest note, right? But the right hand doesn't necessarily have to play the root of the chord because it's already voiced in the bass, just like we did here. The right hand does not need to play 3 notes of an E major triad. The right hand can just fill in everything else, whatever the bass clef, whatever the left hand is not doing. All right. And the example, of course, is just like it was above. Up here with this dominant 7th chord. A dominant 7th chord needs 4 different notes. The left hand took 2, the right hand takes 2. And you can definitely split things up like that. You don't have to have every note in the right hand, for example. All right. Okay, so that's your lesson for today. Give these exercises, give these chords some pretty little voicings here. All right. As you move through, let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.